In this WrestleTalk news, AEW stars are pissed backstage, like in an angry way, not a drunk way. An upcoming clash between AEW and WWE, Chris Jericho implying WWE want him back, and more. Subscribe and enable notifications to always on for daily wrestling news videos. Because if you don't, Dexter Lumis is going to cut off one of the Miz's fingers. Wait, no, that's not actually an effective subscriber drive. If you do subscribe, Dexter Lumis will cut off one of the Miz's fingers.
Support WrestleTalk!
The wrestling world in 2022 has somehow one-upped the insanity of the previous few years. We're already several pages into stuff you never thought would happen, like Cody Rhodes jumping ship to WWE, Vince McMahon being forced to retire, or Elias having an identical twin brother. And kind of an identical whole family. But even with the Vince news, which really is the biggest story ever in wrestling, I can't say I'm surprised about that one. I even predicted it in our 2022 prediction show this year. Here's a clip to show you all how amazing my brain is.
But I think it's going to be a fascinating documentary, but they're going to gloss over everything that matters.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is going to prompt a resurgence of scandal stories around Vince McMahon. In the press. I think WWE are obviously like, we want to be a real media player. They already are a real media player, but they want to always looking for more legitimate means. And I think it's going to shine a light, an uncomfortably bright light on them.
My next tip, my cousin's new Web3 crypto project, Coin, which generates value from the people you get to invest. It's a classic triangle structure, he tells me. Invest now, it's a sure thing.
Information on past performance is not necessarily a guide to future performance.
But what has caught my Nostradamus levels of foresight by surprise is how dramatically AEW and WWE's roles have reversed. At the start of the year, AEW was the cool promotion, put it on a far superior product, with talent trying to actively get out of contracts to join them. WWE, meanwhile, was arguably as bad as ever. Really, the mounting issues were there to see. A head booker overstretched by launching a second weekly show, that second weekly show steadily becoming a clearly missable B show, and the sudden influx of talent creating a bloated roster. My heart and love blinded me to those concerns. And now, following Cody Rhodes' departure, a very public spat with MJF, and reports of major heat issues between the promotion's top stars like CM Punk and Hangman Page, there's yet another claim of unrest behind the scenes. Wrestling legend Conan has occasionally featured on AEW programming, mostly reuniting his LAX stable from TNA with Santana and Ortiz. He was the first one to really confirm speculation that Santana was unhappy with his position in the company earlier this year, following Santana tweeting his contract expiration date. And now talking on his Keeping It 100 podcast, which really loved me, he shared how the AEW locker room has turned. I remember one day, and I won't even say who the wrestler was, a very good friend of mine, I was backstage in AEW. This was probably a year ago, and there were a lot of WWE guys coming in, a lot of new people coming in, and it was the first time the originals were being shoved to the side. Because you can imagine how people like Sonny Kiss and Joey Janela and all these other guys that were there at the beginning, and you don't really see much of them anymore, are feeling when all these other people are coming in. But that was going to happen. When you get bigger fish, you're going to use them. He asked me, is this what WCW was like? I go, this is exactly how WCW started to get. And he was like, oh Conan is likely talking about the time around All Out last year, with several months that saw CM Punk, Ruby Soho, Adam Cole and Bryan Danielson join. Before them, Andrade, Malachi Black and 2.0 had signed on, and shortly after that, we saw Bobby Fish, Kyle O'Reilly and Jay Lethal continue to swell the mid-card. Conan then talked about what happened the most recent time he visited AEW. Then the last time I was there, bro, you have no idea how many people came up to me and they were pissed about the booking. They weren't happy how they were being used. They were very, very vocal about it. Then in catering, someone Conan refers to as our boy stood up in front of everyone and said, "Thank God Conan is here. Maybe they'll use somebody that knows how to book logically." Conan said he hated that. Oh, I bet he did. Because he didn't want it to seem like he was angling for a creative role in the promotion, but confirmed, yeah, people are starting to talk. Do you think AEW's roster has become too big for Tony Khan to handle? Let me know in the comments down below. Fighting within your own promotion isn't Tony Khan's only significant problem, as he has a refreshed, motivated opponent again in Triple H, likely still smarting from when Dynamite defeated NXT in the Wednesday Night Wars. And now, because of some chance scheduling, the two shows will have the first rematch of the new era very soon. Due to the upcoming Major League Baseball playoffs and the American League Championship, sports. The usual wrestling TV schedule is expected to be preempted across the board in mid-October. Dave Meltzer reports that perhaps 2 SmackDowns during the World Series will be moved to FS1, and Dynamite will likely be shifted on Wednesday the 26th to a pre-recorded slot on Thursday night. But the real interesting scheduling clash will be the week before, where AEW Dynamite is expected to be moved off its regular Wednesday night time slot on October 17th to the day before, Tuesday the 16th, the same night as NXT, marking the first time the two shows have gone head-to-head in over a year. There's nothing to suggest that Triple H's era will be any less competitive than Vince McMahon's, with NXT Worlds Collide already being scheduled for the same day as All Out at the start of September, with that show being loaded up with an NXT and NXT UK title unification fight between Bron Breakker and Tyler Bate, as announced on last night's episode. With the closure, definite rebranding of NXT UK to NXT Europe, a project that's even more of a sure thing than the coin, following WWE releasing the vast majority of its European talent. Worlds Collide is expected to have a number of title unifications, with UK Women's Champion Meiko Satomura also turning up on last night's NXT in a segment with Mandy Rose and Blair Davenport. It's Triple H seemingly trying to move his baby on from its weird multicolor 2.0 year, while at the same time he makes the main roster NXT from 4 years ago. Johnny Gargano's unannounced WWE return on Monday's episode of Raw appears to have made an actual tangible difference in the all-important numbers. The show itself pulled in a fantastic rating of a smidgen over 2 million viewers, slightly up from last week's 1.98 million, likely down to the several-week build for Edge versus Damian Priest and the announcement of Trish Stratus making a cameo appearance. You'd hope for a similar ratings boost next week, with Kurt Angle announced for his hometown of Pittsburgh, along with it being the go-home show for Clash at the Castle. But what was even more interesting was Brandon Thurston's deep dive into each segment's individual performance. The quarter hour with Johnny Gargano's return to WWE, 10:15 p.m, slightly grew the 18 to 49 audience in a quarter that usually loses. 10 p.m, usually the lowest hour, averaged a 0.55 in 18 to 49, which is higher than 8 p.m.'s 0.53. The show actually grew, meaning at least in week 1, Gargano did provably move the needle, even if it was only slightly. The most viewed clip of his return on WWE's official YouTube channel pulled in 642,000 views, which makes it the second most watched clip from the episode, behind Beth Phoenix defending Edge at 1.1 million. As Pete covered in yesterday's news, only a handful of individuals knew about Gargano's return ahead of time, which is why it was such a well-kept secret. See, secrets can happen in wrestling. PW Insider is now reporting that Gargano has officially been added to the internal Raw roster as a babyface, obviously, and that he was flown into Toronto on the corporate jet so he wouldn't be spotted by fans. He was then hidden from everyone all day and not mentioned on any run sheets, so most didn't know he was in the arena until he was literally in gorilla position before he went out. In a post-show WWE digital exclusive, Gargano himself said, "To stand there and watch my name come out on the Tron and see people go nuts, I'm like, man, it's really a relief. I feel like a huge weight is lifted off my shoulders now because people remember who I am, and now it's time to get to work." And it's also a relief because he's allowed to use his actual name. Back in April, it was reported that Vince McMahon didn't want wrestlers using their real names, or names they'd used prior to signing with WWE. That's why the main roster Wikipedia page parted like its 2008 crap developmental period all over again, with Pete Dunne becoming Butch and Raquel Gonzalez becoming Raquel Rodriguez. But Johnny most definitely came out as Johnny Gargano. Yet another sign that Vince McMahon and his peculiar quirks really are being phased out. Hopefully now Doudrop can change her name too to literally anything else. With all these new debuts and call-ups, you'd think maybe WWE doesn't actually need the draft that had been reported for after Clash at the Castle. And turns out, WWE seem to agree. Fightful Select report that a post-Clash draft doesn't seem to be anywhere near a slam dunk anymore, noting that Raw stars booked for that week's episode of SmackDown have now been unbooked. Sources at the USA Network have also told WWE talent that the draft isn't happening in the immediate future, with no date listed in its internal calendar, and following next year's WrestleMania is much likelier. And who better to bring back than hot young star Chris Jericho? Jericho replied to a fan on Twitter saying he agreed that WWE squandered his and Kevin Owens' match potential at WrestleMania 33. This prompted someone to fantasy book a Kevin Owens, Sami Zayn and Chris Jericho faction in WWE, to which Jericho himself replied, well, some higher-ups want that to happen sooner than later. Hashtag tampering, implying WWE has sent out feelers about wanting him to return to the promotion. This follows a Fightful report last week that a notable AEW talent was contacted by WWE. This talent referred the call to their representation as they are very happy working at AEW. Jericho first signed with AEW in January 2019. He told Alex McCarthy back in June that he has a year and a half left, meaning it expires at the end of 2023, where we'll have some negotiations to discuss, and that's how it goes. He'll be 53 years old by that point. Do you think we'll see Jericho return to WWE as his last contract? Let me know in the comments down below. Patreon announcement! Mine and Luke's 3-hour review of SummerSlam 2005, with Shawn Michaels' crazy selling for Hulk Hogan, Matt Hardy being practically buried by Edge after the Lita affair, and that Eddie vs. Ray ladder match with custody of Dominic on the line, with the all-time great moment, where the F is Vicky, is out now exclusively for Patreons. Head over to patreon.com/WrestleTalk to listen to it now. For everyone else, what are the 10 biggest real-life finds in wrestling? Watch on to find out more.
Bloody hell, wrestling's a really expensive career. I mean, obviously all your favorite stars are getting fat stacks, but there are a huge number of costs packed into wrestlers' busy schedules. Wrestlers pay for their food on the road, any non-air travel, book their own hotels most of the time, pay for their own gym time in between shows, pay to travel for interviews, and that's not even taking into account all the little pay cuts you can accrue for breaking one of WWE's 2,316 micro rules.